Good morning and welcome to the November 17th Finance Committee. As always, we're going to start off with agenda item 1, contracts. And we're going to start with Kevin Whaley, who's going to talk about microsurface book 3 purchases.
All right, good morning, everybody. So this is for the purchase of 43 additional Surface Book 3s, along with docks, wireless keyboards, mice, and Surface pens. Just as a little background, when we initially took this to the board for the big purchase of Surface Books and accessories, we had to pull that list in early May, late April, early May, in order to get the contracts together, the leasing agreements together, and then get it ready for the June board meeting. So technology is a philosophy. We've kind of shifted. We don't like to order a bunch of extra devices in advance because what happens is when those devices arrive, if they're not put into service, their warranty still starts, their batteries start to degrade, and a lot of different things, we actually don't use them. So we've really shifted to a kind of order as you go model to keep things really tight and not just have a bunch of spares and extras laying around. So this is for 43. These are identified. We've had staffing changes since May, positions added. And then we're also going to supply some of our technology staff that could use some help with having that device, being able to troubleshoot, connecting to IFPs and things like that. So it's 43 devices, totals $78,846.95 paid for out of the technology operations budget. And this really does follow what we do typically in a year when we have an additional staff member added. We'll reach out to Dell, order a laptop. So it's a similar process. We're bringing it here just because it's a big order of 43 over that $15,000 amount. Any questions?
So can I just ask a quick question? Is this then going to be an outright purchase versus a lease on these?
For these, it will.
Okay.
It works out better just to buy them at this point than trying to go through another lease process. Yep.
I thought so, but I just want to double check. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Whaley.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to item 1.02, integrated vision solutions. We're going to turn it over to Dr. Mathis.
Good morning. This is actually kind of an update from last month. We had put this in because we needed to go ahead and start services for some of our students who require orientation and mobility specialist services. This is a position that we were not able to fill, and we had this issue also last year. We're hoping to have somewhat of a long-term plan as our current vision teacher is in a program for hopeful dual certification when that is completed. So at this point, we would be reallocating salary funds for that position that was not able to be filled into the budget to be able to pay for this contract and only be paying for the minutes of service that are required by the IEP. So it wouldn't be a full-time everyday contract. Are there any questions?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mathis. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to item 1.03. Krista Battaglia is available to answer any questions for contracts under 15.
Good morning. Are there any questions regarding the under 15 list?
I think the only question I had, I noticed there was one item, there might have been 2 items related to dyslexia training. And I wondered if that was to start the training that we had approved for that tier 3 services, or if this was, pardon me, additional training.
I'm trying to, do you remember what the name of that contract was?
No.
Oh, I see it. Regional Professional Development Center.
Yes, thank you.
Right, with Dr. Flack. I don't know the answer to that question, but I can check in with him and then get you an answer on that. It says that it is a new contract, and it is for training for 25 participants, but I do not know if that is something new that was started just recently or if it's, part of the work that they've been doing in the past.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And no concerns. I just wanted to have that information.
Yeah,
for
sure.
understanding.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
apologize that I don't know the answer to that, but I will touch base with Dr. Flack and we will get the answer to you.
Great, thanks.
Uh-huh. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. All right. With that, we're going to move on to section 2 of our agenda, facilities. And we're going to turn it over to Kyle Gorell.
Hey, good morning. I'll start with the first item, which is East Trails Middle School City License Agreement. As you remember, we approved a license agreement with the city last month to allow us to do work on their property on the sewer interceptor that is serving the middle school project. We had been working for months to get a permit from the railroad, and the sewer interceptor at its very southern end actually goes underneath the railroad tracks. And so the railroad came back and had some additional language that had to be put into the contract. And so that's been added to the license agreement. It has been reviewed and approved by the district's legal counsel as well as the city's. The city council has that on their, or had that on their agenda at yesterday's meeting. And then if the board approves this tomorrow night, we'll get this in place and be able to move forward with our full building permit for the sewer improvements. Are there any questions on this item that I could answer? All right, thank you. The next item is a series of easements on the Lee Summit High School campus with Evergy. And as you can imagine, with the age of the campus and the number of additions, the number of easements and property rights on the historical landscape of that property is just very complex. And part of the project that we're working on involves upgrading the electrical infrastructure. So it kind of forces us to get in, reevaluate the path of the electrical service and making sure that we have the right easements in place to serve that. And so our engineers found 3 easements that needed to be put into place. 2 of them are existing electrical lines that have just never been in easements that we need to just get put on the record. And there's a 3rd one that is for a new electrical service that comes in from the north that'll need to be in an easement. So I tried to provide a document there, that summary document that shows the highlighted areas of where those easements are located. I'll be glad to answer any questions if there are. All right. I'll move on to the final item. This is the 5th and final change order for the athletics project. These are items that we had known about, and we've been negotiating for a little while with the contractor. I will say that this project is $1.3 million under budget. So overall, it's ended up financially where we thought it was going to over the recent future anyway. The 2 largest items on this change order to discuss would be, one are elevator changes that happened at Lee Summit West. Some may not know this, but when the Lee Summit West press box was built, there was an existing elevator shaft in that press box. And so as construction started and an elevator went in, some of the items in that press box were just not known or in that elevator shaft. The sump pit was in, the wrong configuration and some door locations. Anyway, so there was some cost that was uncovered there. The other item that's the largest thing on the change order is due to delays in the project due to supply chain. And in our contracts, we are not at risk for cost increases. We issue lump sum contracts with our AIA forms. And so on the date that the board approves contract, that dollar figure is locked down. And then it is on the contractor's risk to get materials bought at the price that they bid it at. What we are at risk for is schedule that falls under the force majeure clause, that essentially the acts of God or unknown delays. And so we had some material delays that were really at no fault of the contractor that delayed the project really about a month and a half to 2 months. And so there was some general conditions cost, which means the cost of the contractor just to staff, operate, and run the project. Monarch did start with about $130,000 that they were requesting for that. And Ken Anderson, our project manager, did a great job of really getting into the details and kind of negotiating that down. And so the final cost of that item is, boy, I have to find it on there, $97,000. So if there are any questions on any of the items, I'll be glad to answer them. All right. The final item is the bond budget update report. And this report is, very, very close to what it was last month. We will have another month where it'll stay kind of in a similar position as far as the total resources and the two projects that we've talked about, the middle school renovations and the security project that are currently shown as negatives. So the additional bond sale has occurred, and we anticipate that in January that the additional bond funds will be applied to this report, and we'll get the money moved around into the right places. Are there any questions I can answer in this report? All right.
Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate it. All right. With that, we're going to move on to the final section of our agenda, finance. We're going to turn it over to Nathan Holder.
Good morning, everyone. The first item on our agenda is a change in the internal teacher hourly sub rate. When this occurs is when we have a sub shortage in a building, and we are pulling our own staff, and this is primarily on their prep hour to cover that position. The board changed our sub rate in January of 2021, so last school year, from $100 to $115. And the calculation that is used for this internal teacher hourly sub rate is based on that sub rate. And so what we noticed earlier this fall is that the rate for when a teacher covers that they're compensated for that time had not changed. And although it doesn't have to change, there's nothing that requires us to do this. We just thought it would be a good move and the right thing to do to change that rate. And so in the process of that, we began to develop a spreadsheet. We've tracked that for the last month or so as we've talked about this change. And so we do have the ability, if this is approved tomorrow night, to go back and make that change retroactive to the first day of school, August 25th. And then, of course, that would be the same rate moving forward. The cost estimate there is not very high for the entire year. It'd be approximately $2,000. We hope that number decreases because that means our sub rate, our fill rate is getting higher. And as we know, that's a challenge, not only for our school district, but the school districts across the country. Any questions on that?
I have a quick question. Do you know if there's been any comparison done on how that hourly rate compares with other districts?
Yes, there has been. Our HR department has researched that. The Kansas City area puts that out. So the 1534 would put us on the low end. We would be higher than a couple of our neighboring districts. I think 14 and change was the lowest I'd seen. There was a 15, and then it goes up. It's generally between $15 and $20 an hour.
Okay, thank you.
Or for the period.
Thank you.
All right, our next item is the transfer of funds. As we do every month, we are asking for a transfer of $4,128,686.44 from the general fund, the special revenue fund, to make sure that that fund remains at zero and we're not in the negative in the teachers fund. There's no questions on that, then we'll move on to the treasurer's report. And we'll start with the revenue and expense report. This report is as of October 31st. So it's hard to believe, but in our fiscal year calendar, that is a third of the way through FY22. So we'll start in the revenue section. Just a few things I want to point out with revenue and expenses, and then the general totals at the bottom. If you'll notice our Fund 1 and 2 revenues, if you look at percentage, it's just slightly up as compared to last fiscal year. And so that's a positive. It's basically tracking where we think that it should be. You'll notice the operating fund revenue, still remains low, but just a reminder that will start to come in December, January, and February. And we will see that the operating fund revenue increase dramatically over the next 3 months. Moving across the page, if we look at nutrition services, activity, and the foundation, if you look at those two funds, I wanted to highlight the percentages there. And that is really a reflection of us being in school 5 days a week. And we're seeing that activity increase for the first 4 months of the school year as compared to last year, which is definitely a good thing. When you look at before and after school services, though, you'll notice a decrease there. And just a reminder, that is due to our transition to a partnership with the YMCA. And so the revenue, we will be receiving revenue, and that will actually start in November. It catches us up from the last part of August, September, and October. And so I'd anticipate next month we should see that number rise fairly significantly. Moving down to expenses, again, just to highlight the combined operating and special revenue fund expenses, we are down 1.17% as a comparison to last fiscal year. So from a trend perspective, although last year was definitely a heavy COVID year and there are some differences, it is still a good trend to see as we're a third of the way through the year. And then again, moving over to our restricted funds, the nutrition services, the activity, you'll see that percentage is ticked up. But again, that's a good thing, as that means that because of all the activity that's happening with our school year. You'll also notice that on the BASS fund, again, because of that partnership, that percentage is slightly below the 28% versus the 32.8%. And again, we will continue to see that reflected as we move throughout the year. And that may be an area where we're looking at possibly amending, those expenses, because that in theory should come down a little bit as we move throughout the year. Going down to the bottom, moving back over to the left, with our overall fund balances, you'll notice that they are 4% higher. from a percentage range, about $10 million when you look at dollars to dollars, a little under 10. That's a sign of good health. At this point in the year, we're definitely feeling good about where our budget stands for FY22. Moving back over to the right, something that I definitely want to highlight that is worth noting. If you look at our current fund balance for the Nutrition Services Fund, it is still negative, just over $400,000. However, if you look back at the end of September, you would note that that fund was $1 million and $1,044,000 in the hole in September. And so what we are starting to see is the realization of being in school 5 days a week and that reimbursement for all students being able to eat free, that is finally materializing. And so as we continue to move through next month, when we have this report January, we're going to note that positive change. And so it's a good thing. It's a good thing for our food service department. It's going to allow us to have some much needed improvements, especially as it relates to equipment and kitchens. And so as you look at, last year and where we were trending and all the things that we were dealing with in food service, it's definitely a positive direction. And so that's exciting to see. The activity in LSCF and Bass, as we know, Bass continues to trend down. But again, as we receive that revenue from September and October, we should start to eat into that deficit as we get closer to the midpoint in the year. Any questions on the revenue and expense report? All right, moving on to the investment report. There's not a whole lot to highlight here as it compares to last month, but I will note, if you look at, we do have 2 CDs that are coming off just after Thanksgiving. And then in late December and late January, we have $6 million in treasuries or non-callable bond, and then 2 treasuries that are coming off. What that does represent, if you look at that 6.445 million total, is approximately, it's over 20% of what we have invested with UBS in that Payne Weber. And that is a significant portion when you look at that over the next 2.5 months. And so the challenge that we have is the good news is rates are rising. If you look at the 1-year, 2-year treasury, even out to a 5-year treasury, and CD rates are generally closely tied to those, we are seeing movement up. And so the challenge that creates is, you're always thinking about, well, if I invest 3 or 4 years out and then rates continue to move up, then I'm stuck with a rate that's not as attractive. If I invest for the shorter term, will I have an opportunity in a year or two then to even gain a higher interest rate? So those are the discussions that we're having. But the overall picture is that those notes, the 1-year, 2-year, and 5-year, are moving up in a positive direction, as we would expect that they would with the inflationary pressures that we have. Just to comparison from last year, just about $6 million total higher in invested funds. And then as Kyle noted earlier, you can see our bond fund down there, and we do anticipate receiving those funds on December 3rd. That is our closing date. And so those should be reflected by January in our bond fund report. All right. Any questions on the investment report? Last item is our balance sheet. And again, this is just a reflection of where we ended October. If you notice, if you go down at the general fund, you can see that with the transfer, we've zeroed out our special revenue teachers fund and the total liabilities and fund balance. If you go up to the liabilities column and subtract that number, the $198,124 from the total liabilities and fund balance, then you will arrive at the number that's reflected on our revenue and expenses report with our current operating reserve. Any questions on the balance sheet? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Appreciate it. That really concludes our agenda for today, unless there's any other questions you may have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good
Have a
day.
good day.